Hello, I'm Jeremy Fernandez. Welcome to the program. Timelines around the COVID-19 vaccine rollout are shifting. Some of the early milestones are set to be missed, and vaccinations will now continue beyond the original completion target for October. Health officials have told a Senate committee hearing the rollout has been slowed substantially because of issues importing doses from overseas. In January, a target was set for 4 million jabs to be administered in these coming weeks, but officials now concede it's impossible to predict when that target might be reached. So far, 125,000 people have been vaccinated. Some may now have to wait until next year to get their second dose of the COVID-19 vaccine by the time they've waited the mandatory 12 weeks between doses. Use of the AstraZeneca vaccine has been suspended in Denmark, Norway and Iceland because of reports that people who received it have gone on to develop blood clots. A 60-year-old Danish woman has died as a result. The suspension is being called a precautionary measure, and the European medical regulator says the benefits of the vaccine still outweigh the risks. The Australian government's insisting the jab, which will be offered to most Australians, is safe.
Remember, the batches that we distribute across Australia, those batches are tested here in Australia. They're tested here by the TGA. I was watching them doing it just earlier this week. And so we have a very robust process for examining that.
ABC medical reporter Sophie Scott is closely following these developments. Sophie, this is the same vaccine that Australia is very heavily invested in, 54 million doses on order. How concerned should we be?
Look, you're right. This is the vaccine that the majority of us, that you and I and the majority of the audience is going to get the AstraZeneca vaccine. The experts that we've spoken to have said that there really isn't anything to be too concerned about. And it's very difficult to sort of say whether it's cause and effect, because what happens when you have a mass vaccination program like this is you're going to get people having things like blood clots and heart attacks and other things like that. And it could be just simply a matter that they were going to have that anyway, and it's very difficult to prove that it was a result of having the vaccine. The only way you can really know is to look at the studies or look at whether the number of events, so say for example in this case the number of blood clots, whether that exceeds what you would normally expect in the population. And the experts that we've spoken to have said that you expect about 100 events in 100,000 people, 100 blood clots in 100,000 people. And that's certainly what you'd normally expect. And there's been a lot more of the vaccine given than those numbers, and we haven't seen anything like that. The estimates from the European Medicines Agency are that there was about 30 clot-related episodes to about 5 million people who've received the AstraZeneca vaccine. So there's, if you think about the numbers in those contexts, there's really nothing to worry about. Having said that, any side effect or any adverse event is something that the doctors and the regulators look at closely, and they'll be monitoring this along with any other things that develop to see if there is any pattern or anything we need to keep an eye on.
So could the clot actually be the result of the disease and not the vaccine itself?
Look, that's a very good question, because we do know with COVID that it can cause blood clots. This particular virus does have the ability to do that, and there's been literally, particularly in parts of Europe and the UK, there have been hundreds if not thousands of people dying from blood clots. So it could be that could be related as well. So it's very difficult to unpack when you're dealing with things on such a big scale. But certainly from our point of view in Australia, we're going sort of slow and steady with the vaccine. And in a lot of ways, we're in an extremely privileged position, being able to look at what's happening overseas and to make sure that everything is rolled out as safely as possible. But there doesn't seem to be any concerns with any of the experts that we've spoken to about this increase in blood clots with this vaccine. But we're still in the process of rolling it out in Australia. But there's been literally millions of doses of this dispensed overseas, and particularly in countries like the UK. And so if there was a problem, you would have expected to see it in countries like the UK, and we haven't seen that. Again, also you would have expected to see it in the trials, and we didn't see blood clots as a particular issue in the phase 3 trials of the AstraZeneca vaccine. So that's all very reassuring.
The Danish suspension runs for 14 days. Norway and Iceland have paused their rollouts indefinitely. What will the authorities in those countries be doing now? And will similar studies be taking place here?
So the regulators in Australia look at whatever's happening overseas. They'll be looking at all the data that the European Medicines Agency has about what's happened over there and making our own decisions here. But it's important also to say that as well as looking at what's happening overseas, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, we do our own what's called batch testing. So any of the vaccine that's rolled out in Australia, even if it comes from overseas, is tested here first, or what's called batch testing. So it's sort of an extra level of security, if you like, or safety to make sure that it's safe before it gets rolled out to Australians. So we look at what happens overseas, we look at those investigations, but we also do our own tests here as well. And that's another reassurance for people as well to make sure that anything that's rolled out here is very, very safe. And we'll be making the AstraZeneca vaccine here, or we've started to make it here as well. And so that can give us security in knowing that the vaccine is going to be made onshore. And that's something that the authorities in Australia were very keen to do, Jeremy, because we didn't want to see, as we have seen, that some countries have wanted to maintain the vaccines that are kept, the ones made in Europe are kept over there. The fact that CSL is going to be making the AstraZeneca here means we'll have an ongoing supply and that it will be tested and batch tested for safety while it's made in Australia as well.
Sophie Scott, thank you. In the race to inoculate the world against COVID-19, countries are using vaccine diplomacy to gain political influence in the developing world. Russia, China and India are using instruments of influence to bolster their relationships with allies and form new partnerships. Casey Briggs explains.
A noble goal, but it happens to be one of the biggest challenges of 2021, distributing COVID-19 vaccines across the world quickly and fairly.
Unfortunately, that's a nice kumbaya moment. We all join hands and share vaccines. And that sounds lovely, but the reality has been far different.
There's a vast difference in the way vaccines are being distributed between the developed world and developing countries. Pfizer and BioNTech plan to produce 2 billion doses of their vaccine by the end of this year. 500 million of those have been ordered by the European Union, with the option of another 100 million on top of that. 300 million are also going to the United States, so that's around 45% of the Pfizer doses earmarked for countries that represent 13% of the world's population. There are tensions within the developed world about the pace of vaccination, with Italy blocking doses to Australia and nations keeping a close eye on each other.
Even Angela Merkel said it rankles. She's annoyed to see the UK do so well, and even the US, which rather had a late start. So they feel competitive about where they rank in the hierarchy.
But those are literally first world problems, and vaccine access in lower income countries lags severely. The main international effort to get vaccines to the developing world is COVAX, a scheme trying to get 2 billion doses out this year. It's still ramping up, and some recipients are unhappy with the pace. Bosnia's waiting on a delivery of Pfizer vaccine and says COVAX isn't meeting deadlines.
If it comes to breach of scheduled deadline, Bosnia and Herzegovina will sue the COVAX program and seek compensation.
Bosnia has managed to get its first supply of vaccines from other sources, including Russia. That country is making deals across the world to distribute its vaccine, Sputnik V, the first one to be authorised for mass usage in the world. Across the globe, Russia's been sending or selling vaccine doses to more than a dozen countries already, including many of its neighbours. Sputnik V has also been dispatched to Central America, even as far away as Argentina.
Russia is doing well in Central Asia. I would suspect that countries in Central and Eastern Europe are far more skeptical about Russian influence.
There are likely more deals yet to be done. There's too much demand for the manufacturers to handle.
The problem with Russia now is they've developed it, but they can't actually distribute it, and they need to manufacture it.
The diplomatic battle has other dimensions too. According to a report from Estonia's Foreign Intelligence Service, Russia expects the pandemic to weaken Western unity. And the US has accused Russia of mounting a disinformation campaign to discredit the Pfizer and other jabs. But Russia isn't the only country engaging in international vaccine diplomacy.
More than 60 countries have authorised the use of Chinese vaccines, meaning that the safety and efficiency of Chinese vaccines are earning wide recognition across the world.
Vaccines produced in China are being shipped to more than 43 countries across the world, according to an ABC News tally. China's selling some and donating many. They're going to countries across the bulk of South America, plus parts of Africa, the Middle East and Asia. And then there's India. It says it plans to ship doses to more than 49 countries through its Vaccine Friendship program, mostly free of charge.
India has been very interesting because they have a great ability to manufacture vaccine. So they've been exporting this to 16 countries in their neighborhood, countries that have kind of been influenced by China.
The vaccine is now an instrument of influence and highlights the divide between China and the United States.
We are concerned about the use or the attempted use of vaccines as a means of diplomacy by Russia and China.
China opposes vaccine nationalism, rejects any immunity divide or any attempt to politicise vaccine cooperation. We hope that all capable countries will do what they can to provide vaccines to countries in need.
It is in everyone's interests for the entire world to get inoculated, but all these vaccine donations may give potential superpowers a shot in the arm. The politics behind the deals are as pointed as the needles themselves.
Week after week, one of the questions raised repeatedly by our viewers is, what about pregnant women and vaccination against COVID-19? The advice for pregnant women is a little more complicated than it is for the rest of the population. Professor Kristine Macartney is with us. She's the Director of the National Centre for Immunisation Research and Surveillance. Professor, thanks for joining us. First thing to clear up is this. Is there any evidence to suggest that the Pfizer or AstraZeneca vaccines that are being rolled out in bulk right across Australia are unsafe for women who are pregnant, planning to become pregnant, or who are breastfeeding?
There is absolutely no evidence to suggest they're unsafe, Jeremy. We're dealing more with a lack of exact data in pregnant women, but these are not live vaccines. They can't replicate in the body. They can't, we don't think, parts of the fetus in a pregnant woman. So we actually, although we're not routinely recommending them in pregnancy, we think that they can be considered.
Pregnant women weren't included in the early vaccine trials. Was that the right call, considering the scale of this pandemic?
Look, it is very tried and true that vaccine clinical trials, where you have an active group getting the vaccine and a placebo group, they've tended to exclude pregnant women. They start off with healthy young adults and then go up and down in age. So it's not surprising that pregnant women were excluded, but it is unfortunate because, of course, many countries, and particularly those where COVID is creating such havoc, pregnant women want to take this vaccine to be protected. The good news is that we're seeing now a lot of pregnant women who've chosen to have the vaccine in those countries, and we are seeing safety data, and we will see efficacy or effectiveness data from studies of those women in the real world situation.
So the current advice from the Australian government is that COVID-19 vaccination is not recommended in pregnancy unless you have specific risk factors. So how does a pregnant woman weigh up the risks and benefits in the absence of any data right now?
Well, I think firstly there's no theoretical risk. So it's more about, I don't have data to show the safety in pregnant women from the trials, but there are other sources of safety data. But I'd first say that women should think about where they are and what the risk of COVID is to them. And currently in Australia, the risk of COVID is relatively low, of course, but in other countries it's high. Or in certain settings it might be high, such as a healthcare worker at an ICU or a border force worker. Then they need to think about, what's their own health like? Do they have any underlying medical conditions that might sway them more to wanting to protect themselves, even if the risk of COVID is low? And then, of course, thirdly is, how long is this pregnancy going to last for, which every pregnant woman really wants to know. Perhaps it's okay to wait a few weeks if you're about to deliver. But, the advice has to be very specific and the decision has to be very specific to that pregnant woman.
Professor Kristine Macartney, good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And that's the show for this week. Join us every Friday at this time. Bye for now.